Welcome everyone to another episode of The Inside Word. My name is Lachlan McLean from Beer Cartel, Australia's #1 craft beer retailer. For our 10th episode, I chat to Black Ops co-founder Dan Norris about their amazing story. We talk about how a beer at a pub with three mates can really turn into a successful craft brewery. Welcome Dan, and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So you just mentioned to me before that you're at the Black Ops 2. What's going on today?
Fair bit's going on today. Actually, we've got the local member and I think press coming down to talk about this fire levy that we've just been hit with. So it's a bit of a unique day.
Yes. That was a Brisbane thing? Was that a nationwide thing?
It's Queensland. I'm pretty sure it's all of Queensland, but it's affected us pretty badly because they've sort of just gone and just applied like a $5,000 fee to your rates notice. And because we've got
that was
two breweries,
$500 before, wasn't
it? Yeah, and no, I think it was actually even less, like 200 and something.
Big hike.
Yeah, but because we've got two breweries and we've actually got 5 different leases, so for us it means $25,000, which is insane.
So you got the local member coming down to kind of have a chat about it all?
Yeah, well, the Queensland government have sort of said they're going to be supporting the craft beer industry and put out this strategy. So hopefully they can see that they've kind of stuffed this one up and will help us out. But we'll see how we go.
Yeah, the Queensland government's, I think, been definitely one of the forefront ones. They released the Queensland Craft Beer Initiative or
Strategy,
Strategy, that was it. So they obviously, it's a bit of a strange one that they've kind of doing all that yet then go ahead and do this to you.
Yeah, I worked in government. It's a big organisation. It's hard to for one part to talk to the other. So it's not that uncommon, but hopefully they'll sort of realise that they're hurting local producers by doing stuff like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're here to talk about Black Ops. We're talk about the story behind it. So I think to begin with, we might go all the way back to the start. So there's the three of you, yourselves, Eddie and Govs. Where did you guys all meet?
Well, I met Eddie years ago when I worked for the government. So I would have met him in 2002 when I started there. I only worked there for 4 years. But yeah, I've known him for years and been best mates for years. There was a period there when I was working for myself. We'd both moved down to the Gold Coast from Brisbane, and Eddie was working behind the bar at Burleigh Brewing just on Fridays when they used to do like a brewery bash every Friday, and they'd do like a big one every month. And Govs was the brewer there, and he'd worked in other breweries and eventually left there and went to Fortitude and worked for a couple of other smaller ones as well. But right. we just kind of got into it as a hobby, I just liked trying the different beers. It was nothing more than that. And Eddie was working behind the bar just for something fun to do while he still worked for the government. Govs was full time there as a brewer. So and they were real pioneers for craft beer, definitely on the Gold Coast and in Queensland, and one of the pioneers of the current sort of craft beer, hop-driven craft beer movement. And we were just getting into all those beers at the time, the Pale Ale, the 28 Pale and the Fig Jam and the Black Giraffe and all these awesome beers that they were making. And so there was never any intention for us to sort of do anything. But probably after a year or so, Eddie was just getting more and more into it. He'd go up to Brisbane and get new beers and bring them down for me to try. And we were sitting, actually, he had this idea. I think he saw on the internet, Four Pines were doing a competition to like choose their beer style for their latest limited release. He had this idea for an eggnog stout. I don't really know how or why, but I think he just thought like stouts are yummy. Eggnog flavors are the sort of flavors that would work nicely in a stout, the cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla, and brandy. And so he suggested that to Four Pines for their competition, and he didn't win, but they sent him a carton of beer just like for his troubles. And probably a few weeks after that, we were just sitting up at the pub in Mount Tambourine, and me and Eddie just went up there to drink some beers, and Govs was there. and Govs and Eddie just mentioned this to Govs, and it just turned out Govs had been brewing professionally, but he didn't come from a homebrew background. So he'd actually only just got a homebrew kit, and he'd never used it. He'd pulled it together from a bunch of kegs and sort of wired it up himself and whatnot. And so he's like, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea. Why don't we have a crack at brewing it?" And 2 weeks later, we were back up the mountain brewing this beer, and that's how it all started.
Out.
Yeah.
So that was the first ever beer that the brewery you guys brewed, I guess, not commercially as well, but that seems a great way to start. It's not a pale ale or a lager; it's an eggnog stout.
Well, I mean, at that point, there was no intention to kind of sell it or anything like it was just like, oh, this would be fun. And then after we brewed it, like me and Eddie just had a habit of like starting fake businesses. Like when we worked for the government, we had actually I've got one the other day. I had a bottle that we made called like Brown Sandwich, which is what we used to call beers. So we got this bottle made up, and it was called like Idenad Solutions, which is like Eddie and Dan spelt backwards. It was like super strange looking back at it, but we were just, I think we were just bored working for the government. We had a coffee business, like selling coffee to co-workers for $1 each. Idenad coffee. And so when we brewed this beer, I was just like, oh, let's put some labels on it and make it look like a business. And we were just messaging back and forth about these names. By the time we got round to actually tasting it, I'd done these labels. We'd come up with a name. I'd registered a domain. We had an Instagram account. We'd written a blog post, and we'd made this label. And we actually used the bottles from Four Pines that they gave Eddie for the competition. And so if you ever see, like our very first Instagram post, if you scroll back 5 years, you'll see is just that eggnog stout, the original label, which I did myself. I just Googled like military fonts, and it's that sort of stumpy looking 500 ml Four Pines bottle.
Yeah.
And
the killer beer kind of bottles.
Yeah, and once we put it into bottles, we kind of sent it out to a few people, and they were like, "Man, this is good. Like, what else is Black Ops bringing out?" like they're talking about us like we were actually a legit company. So that kind of started the whole thing.
That sounds awesome. I know that on your Facebook page, on your website, you talk about the whole story, and I think you actually were even brave enough to send some of those bottles to some actual reviewers and some bloggers.
Yeah, I mean, I look back at some of this stuff that's happened to get Black Ops to where it is now, and you couldn't make it up. You know, that's what I love about what our brand is. It's really genuine and organic. Like some of this shit that happened, like you wouldn't make it up. Like so for example, we sent a bottle of the original Black Ops to a blogger called Darren, who now works at Newstead, and he had a blog called 250 Beers. And he was just reviewing different beers, and we're always watching it to see what beers are coming out. And it's like, oh, cool, it'd be good to have him drink the beer. And he wrote a post and just said, you know, he said the beer's great. Like he was nervous about it because he knew Eddie, and he was like, the beer tastes great. There's a lot of expectation around this Black Ops brand, and so he was the guy to write the article. And then probably skipping ahead about 18 months after that, there was a guy who bought a building on the Gold Coast and thought it'd be cool to have a brewery in that building. And so he contacted a bunch of bloggers in the beer industry and said, oh, do you know anyone opening a brewery? And one of the bloggers he contacted was Darren from 250 Beers, who put him onto us. And that is the site of the original Black Ops HQ brewery.
Oh, wow. So it all came through from that original beer you sent to 250 Beers.
Yeah. And there's other stuff like that. There's like 3 or 4 things like that happened that I was just like, wow, how did that even happen?
I think there's a couple of my listeners will go through these. So you brewed this first beer of eggnog stout. It went really well. So you decided to take it a bit further and started Gypsy Brewing?
Yeah, so that was August 2014, and we did what was essentially homebrew in the bottle. And then we thought, okay, well, people think we're bringing out this beer, so why don't we find somewhere to brew it, and then just like I think we put in $1,000 each or something to start. We registered the business name. We found a place to brew it. It was at Beard and Brow, which is a brewery up in Mount Tambourine, which is at Chris's house. And by November, we had a launch of the company at a bar called Hoo Ha Bar in South Brisbane, which is no longer there. But we had like 100 people turn up. We drained the keg in like 2 hours, and it was just like, hey, we've got a beer brand.
So we'll keep going with it.
Yeah, and the reception was really good. So that was the eggnog stout. That was in the middle of summer. It wasn't like a very sensible beer to bring out, but it was just another kind of cool thing. It was just different. Turns out, eventually, we didn't bring a pale ale out until like 18 months ago. So and that ended up like really turning our business around, and it was like the least exciting style you could think of. But to launch the business, it was really helpful to have just something interesting, I think, and just have a talking point. It wasn't intentional. It was just like, this is the only beer we thought of making.
Yeah, it's really. As I say, yeah, it's really interesting. Like I'm from Brisbane, and I remember when all these were coming out, and there wasn't much like it. Really, back even in 2014, 2015, like the craft industry was not the size it is today, but it was certainly growing. But it was such a unique beer, especially even nowadays, eggnog stout. I can't really think of any other style that's kind of comes close to it.
Yeah, it was an interesting idea, and it just worked well. It was just nice flavors. And actually, I was looking at the other day, we had a whiteboard at Gov's house, and we had like our first 3 beers up there. The eggnog stout was done, and we started experimenting with all these other ones. And 2 of the 3 were what we'd written down as Farmhouse Pale Ale, which ended up becoming our beer Beach House. And and the other one was Code Red, which is a red IPA.
Yeah, I think we just had some in the last 6 months.
Yeah, and that one, I was listening to the Dainton episode on your podcast.
Yep.
And it was his red beer that kind of inspired us to do a red beer, because that was one of the beers we drank, and we're like, wow, this is really cool.
The Dainton Red Eye Rye, I think it is.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
awesome. Yeah, and those beers ended up becoming like Beach House ended up winning champion saison at the AIBAs last year, and Code Red won champion Queensland IPA this year at the Queensland Beer Awards, which is just crazy to think that they were the 2 of the first 3 homebrews we did.
And they're all they're so interesting styles. Like there's none of this kind of we'll start with a pale ale, or we'll start with a session ale or a lager, and we'll jump right into it. And I think that really kind of got the brand going, and got people to pay attention.
It did, but it actually ended up being a big problem for us, because after probably a year or so of running the brewery, we realized that we didn't have any of these beers that people wanted, and our main sort of flagship beer was Beach House, and it was a style that no one really knew what it was. And like our sort of idea was like, this could be like our Pacific Ale. It could be like a new style, like a fruity hopped, modern hopped saison. And it's a great beer. It's gone really well for us. But as far as big sellers go, it just wasn't a big seller. Like you had to explain to people what it was. And it wasn't until we brought out a core range of just good solid beers that are the sort of beers we drink all the time that the company really took off. Like before then, we were really struggling.
Well, I guess we're talking about kind of these beers that kind of, got people interested and put you on the map. I think it was start of 2016, or was it 2015? There was a really big international publicity, kind of not stunt, but publicity thing that happened to Black Ops. What was it?
Yeah. So, yeah, it was 2015. This is another one of those stories that I only just found out 2 weeks ago how this came about, actually, because from our point of view, we just got an email from Activision. Actually, it wasn't from Activision. It was from the agency that they work with, the marketing agency. And they said, we're thinking of doing a beer for the new Call of Duty game. And they said it was Black Ops 2, I think, when they sent the email. And Eddie, plays Call of Duty, so he knows the games. And he was like, I'm pretty sure this is spam. Like, Black Ops 2 is actually already out, so it's probably spam. And I remember looking at the email. I'm like, it doesn't look like spam. Like, I've seen a lot of spam. I used to be in the email marketing game. So, yeah, I was like, it doesn't look like spam. But we might as well just ring them up and see what it is. And it just turned out to be a typo in the email. And it was legit. And it was the company was looking for a brewery to brew the official Call of Duty beer for the beer release. And we said yes. Like, we didn't have a brewery at the time. We were just in the mode of just saying yes and figuring it out later, to be honest, which we've been in ever since.
Oh, when Activision come, I don't think you say no.
No, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. And we knew we had like this crowdfunding coming up and we were going to have to raise money to build a brewery. So I was like, well, we can use some of this marketing, as a way to get more attention to the brand and hopefully get some interest in what we're doing. And I only just found out a couple of weeks ago, I was down at Hart's Pub and talking to Mark, the owner there, and he's got a marketing background. And they actually reached out to him first because he had Rocks Brewing at the time and said, "Oh, we're thinking about doing this." And he said, "Oh, you should talk to Black Ops because there's a company that's called Black Ops." And yeah, I only found that out 2 weeks ago, which is crazy.
Oh, so Mark Feathers gave you the Black Ops. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So that was cool. But yeah, I mean, it was so. What we ended up doing was we brewed a midnight pale ale. It was just a black pale ale, which is pretty cool. It was in black bottles. They did the design and they did like an awesome production video behind it and got us on like Channel 9 News and all this kind of stuff. We flew down to Brewpack to brew it. And do a big photo shoot. It was really cool, and the beer was bloody delicious too. Like, it wasn't. It's a craft beer drinker's beer. Like, it's a black pale ale, so it's not an easy drink and not a safe option. But it was yum, and I think, hopefully people don't see it as a stunt because we were like, well, we can just brew a really good beer and get some free marketing, which is basically what everyone in this industry does is tries to brew good beer and tries to market what they're doing so people can drink it. So yeah, from our point of view, it was a good opportunity to do both.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, do you know from Activision themselves, do they do a beer every time they do a game, or was this the first time?
No, this was the first one, first one in the world.
Wow, and they came. So, was there any reason they came to Australia, or was it just that they had kind of seen the name? Or?
I think I think it was just the agency were just brainstorming ideas for ways to promote the game release, and the Australian agency came up with the idea of doing a beer, and everyone liked it. Like, they've got a lot of legals to get through with that kind of stuff, so there was a few hoops to jump through. But yeah, for whatever reason, the Australian guys liked it, and they were the one that ran with it. They sort of didn't. We didn't really send it overseas. I think they gave some cases out to influencers and whatnot. I think Guy Sebastian got a case, which was pretty cool. He was pretty big at the time. I guess he still is. But yeah, it was a cool experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great way just to get your brand out there, and it's certainly unique as well. I think a lot of the things you guys do at Black Ops is certainly unique, and I guess that's a good segue into, you mentioned crowdfunding, and I know a lot of people listening to this would know that you've just done a crowdfunding, but the problem they don't realize is that you did the very first brewery fundraiser crowdfunding 3 years ago.
Yeah, that was 2015, or just the very start of 16, I think, just before we launched the brewery. So we did it just after the Activision. We sort of used some of that momentum to put into the crowdfunding, and we were just trying to scrape together anything we could to start this brewery. And so we raised $18,000, which we used in the build and helped enormously to get the doors open. And that was, I think breweries maybe had done them before, but not to launch a brewery. So we were sort of the first to do that. And ultimately ended up being the first to raise via equity crowdfunding as well.
Was there, like, as far as I will not know, but the whole crowdfunding thing's obviously been in the spotlight very recently. Was there some legislation that changed? Did you guys have to do anything different back then to kind of do the whole crowdfunding?
Well, there's two different types of crowdfunding. So reward-based crowdfunding, which is it's basically like pre-selling. It's like, we're launching this thing. Here's if you give us $100, we'll give you a carton of beer when we have it ready. That's been legal. That's never been a problem. But it's the equity crowdfunding that the laws have changed. And I've been wanting to do it for ages. There's been talking about this in articles and podcasts for years, and we were just waiting around for the legislation to come into Australia, which it did at the end of last year.
So you said that that was a reward-based crowdfunding. What was the reward? What did people get out of it?
We had things like T-shirts. We used it to buy our first bottling machine. We actually had bottles before cans. So we had our beach house went into bottles, and we had a carton of beer as the reward. T-shirts. We had a shirt which said Black Ops OG on the front. And and we still see those shirts in the tap room now. Like, people will rock up wearing these shirts. I've still got one. Mine looks pretty old, but you see some people rock up and they look brand new. I'm like, how did you do that? But yeah, that kind of stuff. Oh, and the book as well. I wrote a book some point in there as well, and we had the book as a reward in the crowdfunding too.
What was the book all about?
It was called Operation Brewery, so same name as our podcast, and it was just everything that had led to building and opening the brewery.
Yeah, right. I'm going to touch on that in bit down the track, but I wanted to jump in because you've mentioned pale ale and that the business really didn't take off until you went to cans and you got your core range. Was that done out of necessity, or what was the reasons? Well, one, you went to cans, and two, the pale ale.
Well, we were always going to go to cans. We just couldn't afford a canning machine, so we had to wait around for a company to offer mobile canning. And as soon as they did, we jumped into cans straight away. And it was a process going to pale. So when we did that pale ale, it was our first like pale ale. Basically, we'd done another one called Bitter Fun, which was a real hoppy bitter sort of pale ale, but it was basically our first pale ale, and it ended up being a double batch, brewed our first beer into cans, and our first beer with this mobile canning company, and all of it went into cans. So that was like a critical turning point. Like if that went badly, Black Ops would not be here right now. And it just came about because actually the first time I remember thinking about it was when the Hottest 100 came out, and it was the second year we'd had beer in the market. And we'd done all this. We'd done the crowdfunding and the Call of Duty stuff, and like the beers were getting a good amount of love. Like people liked the beers, so like we knew the beers were good. But Beach House was the one we were pushing. It was our flagship beer, and I listened to the Hottest 100, listened to every single one, all the way up to 100, and we weren't in there at all. And I was just like, how can we not even be in there? Like we weren't selling a lot of beer. It was only very, very much local, but we had a really good local support. And I just thought, like, for something like that, I know it's just a popularity contest, but I just felt like if we were as relevant as we should have been as a brand, we should have been in that list. And I was having a beer with a mate of mine the next day at a bar around the corner, and they had Beach House on tap, and they had, I think, Pacific Ale or something. I think it was Pacific Ale. And he was like, "Oh, you guys should do a beer like this." And I'm like, he's right. I mean, we're a craft beer brewery that doesn't have a pale ale, and that's the kind of beer I drink all the time. Like if I go into the bottle shop, I would get pale ale. I was drinking, I'm trying to think what ones I would have been drinking at the moment. I don't know if Hendo's beers would have still been. I used to drink his Hop Zone a lot.
Yeah.
And
yep.
Yeah, and just beers like that, just like hoppy pale, just tasty pale ales. Like I drink them all the time. I think, but like Bolter would have had theirs out.
Yep, Pirate Life.
Pirate Life, yeah, we're drinking heaps of Pirate Life beers. So that was when Pirate Life were just firing. So Hop Hog, like all those sort of beers, like and Pack Ale, like all of those ones. Like they were the beers that my favorite beers, and they still are. Like they're the beers I drink a lot of, and we didn't have one. We didn't even have a standard IPA. We were doing a quarterly IPA seasonal release, and I was like, "You're right. Like we need the sort of beers that we like drinking." And so yeah, I literally like we went into work the next day, and I brought it up at the meeting, and I'm like, "We need to do a really, really, really good pale ale," and the guys agreed, and it was around about the time we were looking at the mobile canning. So we thought, okay, let's do this properly. Let's completely redesign the package, and we'll put it as the first beer into cans, and we'll brew the best pale ale that we can. Burley was the other one we're drinking. Probably not so much then. It was a few years before, but that was one of the ones that really got me into Little Creatures and Burley pale ale. Were the two where they're like, oh, this is like amazing, like American hop, just fruity and delicious. So we put the pale ale out, and the cans look really sick, and we were one of the first to do the sort of labelled cans, and a Modus were before us, but now it's just like super common. But for us, it just works so perfectly well to be able to have a really sick looking can, but with a label that we could change each time. So we could put 3 or 4 beers out without having loads and loads of cans and loads of designs. And that just hit. As soon as that got into stores, that was the one that was the turning point, and that's been our number one selling beer ever since. And it's gone on to do amazing things for us.
You mentioned, the pale ale and the whole style, and That was the beer that you were drinking and all that sort of stuff. But back in, I guess, what's that, late 2016, I'm guessing, early
It was
2017?
20. It was 2017, I think. Maybe it was even 20. Yeah,
Yeah.
2017, I think.
Like, cans were big back then, but they didn't have the industry dominance that we see today. Was there any reason why you chose cans?
Oh yeah, we were always going to go cans. It was for the sort of the, I guess, the craft beer nerds, and I'm including myself in that category. I'm not disparaging anyone else. Like, cans were the only option. Like we could see that coming, and like we love cans, and it was just a matter of being able to afford a canning machine, which we couldn't. So I'm just trying to think what was happening at the time. Bolter had theirs out. So Bolter started a few months before we did in 2016, and I think they were into cans straight away. So they'd had theirs out. We were drinking quite a few cans. I'm trying to think who else had cans out.
But I mean,
there was
Pirate Life.
Yeah, Pirate Life, of course. Pirate Life, of course. All of their stuff was in cans. We certainly weren't one of the first. There was plenty.
Yeah, so you had to guess. You can see what's working before you get to make that decision, and definitely cans. Like, we are always staggered to the hold that cans have taken on. I know we posted on our socials, I think it was only yesterday, a photo of our little store, and the shelves on that, and from, I think, 2013, and not one can in sight.
Yeah,
all bottles. If you go down there right now, I don't think, outside of some of the bigger stouts, Farmhouse, there's pretty much no bottles.
Yeah, I'd just been to America too. It was just a fluke. I'd been over there right when Black Ops started to sell my other business, and just sort of saw what was happening over there, and we were kind of inspired. Me and the two guys ended up going later on, but I'd been over by myself at the start and just kind of inspired by what was going on over there. So it was probably driven by that too. But yeah, it was big for us because, like, while we did have beer in bottles, like, we weren't wholesaling any of it. We were just, it was like a four head manual bottling line. Guys would come in, we'd do like 5 cartons in a day and sell them at the tap room. It wasn't a meaningful part of the business. But as soon as we put the cans, like, I think we're in one bottle shop before we put the cans out. And like, you can see in our history, like financial history, our business just goes nuts as soon as we put the beer into cans. And it was the right beer at the right time, and the design was well received and all of that stuff. It was just a perfect storm, and it came at such a critical time. It was going into winter, we were running out of money. It was a big turning point.
So you did the pale ale, the first core range beer. You've now got a core range of 4 or 5 beers.
We've actually got 6 now. It's a little tricky though, because we've got some customers that want certain beers. So we've got some customers that are regularly getting Pink Mist and Eggnog Stout, which are not technically part of our core range, but we do put them in cans. But our core ranges, we've got mid-range, our mid-strength, Sender, a session ale, Late Ale, Lager, Pale Ale, Hornet, our IPA, and Super Hornet, our double IPA.
Yeah, I know from us that since we've been able to get them down here, they've just been going absolutely gangbusters whenever we get them in. And on top of the core range, you've got a highly, agile, ever-changing limited release program. Yeah,
well, we're lucky enough to have, so ever since we started, we had a backup pilot brewery. So it was originally the thing that Govs threw together with his kegs, and then it was a brew in the bag system that our friend Moog put together, this brew in the bag setup for us, which was our pilot brewery for a little while, and then we eventually bought one from Tiantai. Now we have 2 breweries, 2 sites, which have 2 breweries at each site. So we've got the main brewery house and the pilot brewery at each site. So we're just cranking out limited releases, and we can can them as well because we've got a canning machine at each site now.
If you're looking for any of the Black Hops beers, new releases, or an old favourite, be sure to check out the Beer Cartel website at www.beercartel.com.au. So you mentioned that you've got two breweries, which we'll get onto, but you've got a pilot batch at one, and you've got both of them, and you've got a production at both of them. Does that just give you that agileness, or why do you do that?
Yeah, well, we have 2 tap rooms too. So the pilot breweries are basically just brewing beer for the tap rooms, and we've just brewed our 100th beer, which And yeah, every week you go to the Black Ops tap room, there'll be different beers on tap. We brewed 52 last year, so we brewed one beer a week just with one brewery. And we'll do events like we did a IPA day on the weekend, and we had 10 different IPAs on tap. We did a tap blackout a few weeks before in winter, and we had 14 different black beers on tap. So we can do stuff like that, and we can also put them into cans. So we can brew on that pilot system. We've sort of designed the cans so we can print them in-house for just the limited release cans that we sell only at the tap room. And yeah, it's just it's always been what Black Ops does is just brew lots and lots of different beers, and some of them end up being released far and wide, but for the most part, they're just brewed on a tiny scale and sold at the tap room here.
I know that in our kind of research in our craft beer survey, and we're talking about the core range. Has the current trends of all these limited releases and people always wanting new, and I think in our research, 1 and 2 beers that people buy will always be something new.
Yep.
Have you found, is that hard to deal with?
Well, isn't that like the whole beauty of what we do? Like I listen to podcasts talking about this and kind of complaining that everyone's always wanting something new, and you hear it in the Facebook groups, and to me it's kind of the beauty of this whole thing. Like it's just innovating on new ideas, and it's the whole reason we're here. So yeah, I'm not going to complain about that. I mean, there's a lot of things that are challenging. I mean, obviously from a business point of view, you'd rather sell 1 million liters of pale ale and nothing else, because it'd be a hell of a lot easier. But if you did that, you're just going to be one of the big brewers, and you're not really all that relevant. So yeah, I think it's awesome, and our staff love all these beers we have coming out. The brewers love making different beers. We do like a staff beer for people who've been here for a year, so the staff get to write their own recipe and get their own fully branded design and brew their own beer. That's the beauty of what we do. So yeah, it's certainly challenging, but you wouldn't have it any other way.
I think that's I know for myself, it's what kind of keeps you interested, and it's always ever changing, and it never gets stale. You come into work, and I think, oh God, we're averaging 30 to 40 new beers a week at the moment. So what's that? Over 2,000 new beers a year, getting close to, It's just always different. It's never the same, and it kind of just keeps you engaged.
Yeah, and you also you got to remember, like a lot of the conversations in like the Facebook groups and whatnot that we're in are all about these new individual crazy beers, but for the vast majority of people, they're drinking lagers and pale ales and maybe IPAs. Like that's where all the bulk of the beer is. So it's not, it's a good fun thing to talk about, and it's always cool to see the latest NEPA and whatnot. But that's really right at the pointy end of what we do. For the most part, people are drinking lagers and pale ales and IPAs, and for us, our like monthly limited normally goes pretty well, but we still sell more pale ale than we do our monthly limited, and it wouldn't, we could brew more of the monthly limited, but we probably wouldn't be able to sell it, because people might buy a single can, or they might buy a 4-pack if it's a particularly good one. But people are buying whole cartons of pale ale and lagers and IPAs.
Yeah, I think we forget that even though the craft beer sector is growing, it still is only a 5-6% share of the beer market in Australia. So there's still so much growth that can happen in the industry.
That's right,
which is exciting.
And that 5%, I mean, how much of that is taken up by Pacific Ale and Bolter XPA and like these specific beers that are probably just selling shitloads, and the limited one-offs, hazies and the crazy imperial stouts and whatnot, you get a lot of the attention, but they're probably just an absolute minuscule percentage of what gets consumed.
It's almost 5% on the 5%, I would say.
Yeah.
So yeah, which is exciting, I guess, for the craft beer community, because there's such a potential for growth, and like it has been growing at such a rate, but it still is so small, which is super exciting to see. Like I know I've been in the industry 6-7 years, and like the growth that we've seen has just been incredible, and to see where it's going is even more exciting.
Yeah, it's amazing. The last few years have been insane. Like our timing to open a brewery, like at the time was sort of like, oh yeah, there's not that many breweries on the Gold Coast. We think there's room for another one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in hindsight, the timing of when we and Bolter opened on the Gold Coast is just absolutely perfect, and it's pure luck. At least from my point of view, it's
Absolutely.
pure luck.
It was just a perfect storm.
Yeah, and what's happened since is just staggering. Like back then, there was really one brewery. Like there was Burley Brewing, and now and even Brisbane. Like Brisbane's gone mental with craft beer. I was in Brisbane at the time. Like we were, Black Ops launched in Brisbane. And
I remember. I know Hoo Ha Bar.
Yeah, and that was a bar with. It was one of the best craft beer bars, and they only had 4 taps, I think. And there was only a few. There was there was Scratch. Scratch were there very early. There was Archive.
Yeah, the Scratch is where I got into craft beer back in 2011, I think.
Same.
They opened.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. And I remember back then, from when I used to work at a bottle shop in Brisbane, and the only Brisbane breweries we could get were really Green Beacon, and Newstead, and Fortitude.
Yeah, and when they opened, like Green Beacon, like I went to the Newstead opening. It wasn't that long ago, like there was nothing there. There was Green Beacon, and now there's way more breweries just in that part of the city than there were bars that served craft beer at the time, and it's only 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's absolutely growing incredibly fast. And on that kind of growth, you talked about you opened the brewery, your Black Ops 1, but I think it's only been the last year you've opened a second brewery.
Yep, we opened in March this year. So the original one I talked about, the location in Burleigh was just awesome. It's just we're actually very close to opening near Bolter in Currumbin. We're looking around for industrial land, and you just couldn't get it anywhere. And there was a little pocket of industrial or semi-industrial space in the northern end of Burleigh, and this came up, and that was just epic. It was such a good location, but it's semi-industrial. There's literally houses across the road from us. It's not a place to build a huge brewery. It was always going to be if things went to plan, we were always going to outgrow the place. But we knew it was always going to be a great location for a brewery. It's as good as you can get for a location for a brewery. Actually, not as good as you can get. Felons is probably better. Little Creature's probably better, but it's pretty good. Pretty good. And so then it was, okay, well, so we're always going to open another brewery if things went well. And we started thinking about it halfway through last year. And we were looking at, again, potentially Currumbin, which we obviously, by that time, Bolter had blown up, and it just wouldn't have made sense for us to go down to Currumbin. Burleigh Industrial was the other option, but that's where Burleigh Brewing are. So I was kind of driving around there thinking it's close, but it would mean 2 breweries in Burleigh, and Burleigh Brewing are already here. It'd be kind of weird for us to open next door in this industrial estate. But there's just not much industrial land on the Gold Coast. So we're looking around. The North End was always appealing, but again, there wasn't a lot of places available that looked good. But we found this shed. It was actually one of the first ones I looked at in this area. And it turned out to be the original Riviera Boat Building Company sheds, and it was just used for dodgy storage of some sort. It's just been sitting here basically vacant. And I just walked in here and I was just like, this looks like a brewery. It had a perfect 150 square meter space for a tap room, and I could just see instantly exactly how that was going to look. And then to the right of that, there's a big sort of 1,000 square meter big open shed with absolutely nothing in it, 7-8 meter ceilings. There was a mezzanine office upstairs. There was a shed next door with even higher ceilings, so we could expand into that. And it was just this is perfect. But it was so much bigger than the current one. And we had no money. Equity crowdfunding wasn't legal. We'd never had any assistance from the bank. We'd recently raised money from investors for expanding Black Hops. So it was how the hell are we going to do this? We knew it was going to cost $3 million too. So anyway, we somehow did it. It's just another one of those freaky things. I look back and just think I don't even know how we did. But we opened it up in March this year. Took us, I think, 7 months, and the brewery's massive compared to the original one, and the tap room's really nice. We designed all that ourselves and worked with our builder to build that for us, and it's just a big step up from HQ. Now,
able to provide beer to the demand.
Yeah, well, we've got a lot of room to grow into now. So before it was more we better not sign up any big customers because we're not going to be able to resupply them, especially in summer. So summer last year was looking like, man, we're going to be close to running out of capacity, and we were close because we didn't get the new brewery open until March. By that point, the seasonality was starting to affect it. But the volume we're doing now, we wouldn't be able to do at the original site. And now's the middle of winter, so summer, it's going to be our first summer where we can brew literally as much beer as we want to, as we can sell, just about.
That's so exciting. I guess you've been touching on it throughout this podcast, and I want to kind of have a chat about it. And that's, you're always open and telling the stories, and go on social media and you can kind of find anything that's about the business. The first one that I kind of was looking into was when you were doing the original investment back in 2015, I think it was, and you mentioned your podcast. And it was how open you were about the investment, to the point where I think you even released some of the investment calls.
Yeah, that was our first episode. Was me ringing Simpo, who was our first investor, and just like trying to figure out if he wanted to invest in Black Ops. So yeah, it was a fun way to go about it. And to be honest, like that's why I like the crowdfunding thing, because it's not like that transparency doesn't really exist with traditional fundraising. Like I had no idea how these breweries actually got built. So like we were like, how are we going to build a brewery? It's going to cost us $400,000. This is the first one. And it was like, well, we sign a lease and then we figure out how to get $400,000. And that's what we did.
And you, throughout the entire, 5 years now of Black Ops, you've always released how you do things. To like, I remember one blog post that I read was about, how you get to your pricing and the craft beer pricing, but right down to the detail of this is how much we pay our designer, this is the label prices, all this.
Yep. Why
do you do that?
It's just, for me, it's like, it's really the only sort of marketing I've ever really been able to do. It's a sort of marketing that I think is great because it's helping out other people in the industry. I know there's lots of brewers that have opened up after reading our book or listening to our podcast or reading some of our content, and I know it's helped them, and that's good. Like, normal marketing doesn't do that. Normal marketing is just purely self-serving and doesn't help anyone. So to me, like, this content marketing is just something I did before Black Ops. It was how I marketed my business before, because again, I just didn't really know how to do anything else. I tried to like do paid ads and yellow pages back in the day, and I just couldn't make anything else work. So once I started this content thing, it just felt really natural. It just felt like a really good way to tell your story, but also help other people out at the same time. And it's pretty cheap and easy. So it was just the way we always did it. And I just always liked the idea of doing it in the beer world, because it just wasn't really the done thing. Like, it felt like at the time there was just a lot of secrecy. It's not really like that anymore. I don't think. There's a lot of transparency now, which is cool. But I felt like at the time, like, this transparency thing was happening to other industries. Like, I was in online marketing and it was happening there, but it wasn't really happening in beer. It was like quite secretive. So I thought like doing it in beer would be a really cool, like, rather than like doing it in the online marketing world, which is just full of noise and you're up against everyone else doing the same thing. Doing it in an industry where it's quite new and different, I thought would go quite well. And it's turned out to be a bit of a unique thing about what we do.
I know that's one of very similar philosophy of, I guess, for us for the craft beer survey, and while we do all that, it give all the information back to the breweries, and it's very similar sort of philosophy.
Yeah, I was listening to the episode with Richard. It's awesome. I love that stuff. I mean, it's I've been reading that survey since you guys brought it out, and it's super beneficial to people in the industry. It's really good content. It's not just the same stories. Like, it like produces something new. It creates debate, and to me, that's an awesome way to do marketing. If you can do the sort of marketing that's going to help your brand and also help other people and also create some fun content and stuff for people to talk about, then that's cool.
Absolutely. I think Rich has done an amazing job with the craft beer survey, and exactly the same with you guys with Black Ops. I think your marketing is unique and it's absolutely on point. So massive kudos from us at Beer Cartel.
Thanks.
Last but not least, what's next for Black Ops? What can we see in the next year, 5 years, 10 years?
Oh God, 5 years, 10 years.
There we go.
Hopefully.
I'll say, well, what do we see in the next year?
Well, we're just trying to trying to keep going, doing what we're doing. It's a really. I was thinking about this the other day. We're in a declining market. Like we're building a business in an area. Alcohol is so heavily taxed in Australia. It's a declining thing. Like people are drinking less, and so for craft breweries to actually do well, it requires. It's like the amount of talent in this industry is insane. Like I was on our podcast talking to Sterling from Bolter during the week. Like the effort and the thought and everything that goes into what they do, and the small amount of resource. Like you'd think Bolter would have 20 people on their marketing team. It's just like Sterls and Ben, pretty much. And same as us. Like I've never hired a marketing person. I've got me and Leah just like basically runs Black Ops, but she helps out with the marketing. But it's so lean, and you have to do such good work that it's
exactly the same as us.
Yeah, it's super challenging, and it wouldn't, like, breweries would not last if they weren't doing a good job at basically everything, because it's so competitive, it's so financially difficult to run a brewery in Australia. So for us, it's keep doing the same thing. Hopefully, be able to do it for as long as we can. Like just create a great business. That's what I would love, to be able to keep making great beer, keep this amazing team employed, and create a brand that people like. And that's I could just keep doing that forever if the conditions allow us to do that. But yeah, we really need to get up to scale more so than we are now. Like, we built a huge brewery, so we're doing a lot of work, finalizing the core range, bringing out monthly limited releases, getting the tap rooms cranking and building the brand, just getting beer into more bottle shops, more bars, getting beer into state. So just getting ready for summer and hopefully getting up to a scale where this thing can just sustainably, keep doing what it's doing.
Well, I think you've built the brewery, you've got the tools, I guess, and I hope to see Black Ops go from strength to strength.
Thanks, me too.
Thank you so much for joining me today and taking some time out of your busy day. And for everyone out there, make sure you get the Black Ops beer. I know we've got them all in stock. And thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, mate. To keep doing what you're doing. It's awesome. I think more podcasts in this industry is fantastic. So I'm huge supporter of you guys for this content and the survey and everything else you do.
Cheers, Dan. The Black Ops story is one that really must be seen to be believed. Who would have thought that three mates drinking in a pub would go on to open one of Australia's best breweries? It just shows what a little bit of creativity, a passion for beer, and some savvy marketing can really do. Once again, thank you so much to Dan for joining me today. And if you have any questions, please let us know on our Facebook group, Beer Cartel's Craft Beer Collective. If you'd like to continue to stay up to date with the latest from the craft beer industry, please hit subscribe at either iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. That's it for today. I'll see you next time.